Hi, I am a recovering book purist, and I am generally liking the Wheel of Time adaptation.
Is that legal?
Now, before you run away, hear me out. There is plenty to be critical about, especially the latter episodes. But Amazon's Wheel of Time has made some significant changes, especially in the middle episodes, that I think not only work, but show clever adaptation. So whether you're enjoying the Wheel of Time, never heard of it, or rather angry with all the changes, please stick around. Just stay a while and listen. A couple pieces of context. It's difficult as a book fan and a recovering book purist to parse out one's bias when looking at an adaptation. I've read Wheel of Time twice, but I'm not like Daniel Greene levels of Wheel of Time fan. That for me is Lord of the Rings. And so when I'm struggling to enjoy Rings of Power but enjoying Wheel of Time, is it because I'm a bigger fan of Lord of the Rings and it's easier to be disappointed by something you dearly love as opposed to something you love? Maybe. But I think Wheel of Time is a better adaptation than Rings of Power. I think. And yes, I am a recovering book purist. I, at one point in my life, had managed to convince myself that I didn't like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings because of all the changes. Two things really shifted my mentality on that. One, listening to the special edition and all the different reasons why they made those changes. I still have two complaints. Faramir's characterizations and Sam Go Home doesn't make any sense. But other than that, it's probably my favorite adaptation. We've come a long ways. And then also listening to hours and hours of lectures by Dr. Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor, which taught me to think more deeply on why changes are being made. To translate a story from text to film requires deviations, and therefore to be patient with changes to the original story. Watch. Wait. Suspend judgment initially to give that adaptation space to see how it interprets the text. Is it doing something interesting with it? What is the adaptation emphasizing from the original text? But suspension of judgment does not mean no judgment. I will still abandon adaptations if I believe they've left the path of wisdom. But my tolerance for change is greater. It takes me longer to pull the trigger, but hopefully it's a little more informed and a little less of a knee-jerk reaction when I do. Hopefully. On to Wheel of Time. That's what the topic of this video is. There's two major changes I want to talk about. One is the delayed introduction of the characters Thom, who ends up being a fairly minor character in the adaptation, and Nynaeve disappearing for a while and then returning. And so for those of you that are not familiar with the books, there is a huge company that leaves the two rivers, effectively the Shire, right at the beginning of the story. Not only do you have Rand, Mat, Perrin, Egwene, and Moiraine, and Lan, so that's 6, but Nynaeve was also part of that company, and Thom, 8. Imagine the entire group of the Fellowship of the Ring leaving from the Shire. That's a lot of characters to be introduced all at once. Now, in the book, it works because the introduction is quite long. You have a long time to learn about all these characters. In the context of the TV show, the reason for the delay seems obvious to me. There's lots of characters to introduce in a hurry. You probably needed double the episodes to do the book justice. So delaying Nynaeve and Thom gives more time to flesh out the 4 and Moiraine and Lan. Then we introduce Nynaeve and focus on her. Introduce Thom, give him breathing room. These are functional changes. Like changing cities into villages for budgetary reasons, or shifting the whole Camelin plot to the next season to reduce the number of characters being introduced and to spread out building yet another giant set, to do it all in season 2 and make really heavy use of it there. We'll see how that decision goes. There are kind of changes where it's too bad, but we're dealing with finite resources. They are understandable. Not something I will critique unless I think they are skipping so much as to miss the heart of the story. And Wheel of Time stops in a lot of cities. It's an understandable change, tolerable, neutral even. But what I like is they took the delayed introduction to do so much more. This is where I think they got clever, because they created the perfect timing to reveal Thom's backstory with the hunt for the false dragon. Understand, in the book, the hunt and stilling of the false dragon Logain happens almost entirely, if you will, off screen. This is something books can do very well, and I think it works perfectly there. I love the way Robert Jordan drops rumors of the wider world. Some true, many false, but as the story progresses, we get little updates as Logain proclaims himself the Dragon Reborn, starts revolution, Aes Sedai hunters are sent out, his defeat, his capture, his gentling, all told from a distance. Then some of the characters finally see the caged false dragon in Camelin. It's a chilling scene. I love this scene in the book. A great man, once dangerous, now defeated. And I think it's brilliantly told. But it's not very good for the screen. The screen is a visual medium which works best when showing information rather than telling us. There's a reason why Fellowship of the Ring gave us point-of-view scenes of Saruman. This is a significant change from the books, but necessary to show the rising power of Isengard and the degradation that evil has on the lands. These are entirely invented scenes in Fellowship of the Ring, but necessary to build the danger the Fellowship is going to be up against. And so in Wheel of Time, this is why having Moiraine, Lan, and Nynaeve run into the Aes Sedai and the captured Logain is an excellent change in translating the story to screen. The whole plotline is entirely invented. None of it comes from the book. At no point does Moiraine, Lan, and Nynaeve run into that hunting party. At the same time, I would argue it is true to the spirit of the story, despite being a complete fabrication. Though there are parts within the story I might quibble about, I support the change as a whole. The first season of Wheel of Time especially is doing some incredibly heavy lifting in introducing not just all the many characters and a big world, but a complicated magic system and political structure. These new scenes with the False Dragon adeptly show just why the Aes Sedai are so terrified of false dragons, as well as setting up the conflict within the Aes Sedai in the Ajah ranks. Also takes the opportunity to show what happens to the bond between an Aes Sedai and a warder when the Aes Sedai die. This is setting up plot points well in advance that won't pay off until seasons down the road. So despite it being an invented scene, it's jam-packed with essential world building. The viewer is getting schooled without even knowing it. So we have functional/tolerable changes, the delayed introductions of Nynaeve and Thom, and we have brand new scenes of dense world building. But now we get to why I think these changes are examples of clever adaptation. Not just good adaptation, but clever adaptation. Because what impressed me is how they combined the two. The delayed introduction of Thom fed the false dragon story and vice versa. What do I mean? The cold opening starts with Logain conquering the kingdom, and I love his portrayal. Book Logain is one of my favorite minor characters. I love his character arc. It was very unexpected. So I enjoy TV Logain getting some love, especially his characterization. I expected him to murder the king. We see the sickness in the magic wielded by men. This is important because our main character is going to be struggling with this all the seasons long. And yet despite this sickness, we see Logain fighting against the madness. It's a losing fight, but there's a nobility in fighting the inevitable defeat rather than succumbing right away. And I love Robert Jordan's idea that as the pattern is prepared to spin out the real Dragon Reborn, more and more false dragons are spun out. Logain is the dragon that almost was. So we see the madness and power of the false dragon in the opening scene. And it's that same episode that Thom opens up with his backstory, his guiding motivation, his nephew who could access the One Power in a minor way. The Aes Sedai caught his nephew and gentled him, cutting off his access to the One Power after he lost the will to live and eventually killed himself. Here we learn what gentling does to a man, that though they live, the light of life has left them and they prefer death. This feeds into the end of the episode where Logain is gentled. Because of Thom's backstory, you understand what is being done to Logain and understand that he will prefer death. I think this is very cleverly constructed to not just make the necessary changes based on the limitations of film, but to use those limitations and play into the strengths of the screen. This is very efficient storytelling where everything in the episode is building our understanding of the false dragon and the corrupt male half of the One Power. I might have complaints with later episodes, but episode 4 is firing on all cylinders. We took a byway to get there, but I think the show is still heading in the right direction and why I am still enjoying the adaptation. Which isn't to say I think every change is good. I struggle with Siuan's characterization. Someone more steeped in Wheel of Time lore could maybe help me out here in the comments. But the way Siuan forces Moiraine to take an oath on the Oath Rod feels fairly similar to how the Oath Rod is later abused in the book. But I'm a little bit shaky on my lore, but it felt wrong. There's a fair amount of power creep with people that are untrained with full-on resurrections, as far as I can tell, or mass healing. I prefer Robert Jordan's more subtle introduction to the One Power where you don't even know it, and then they get sick, and then afterwards you learn, oh, that sickness is a sign of someone that has been awakened to the One Power, and that other moment before where they're acting strangely and something weird and fantastical was happening, that was their first introduction to use of One Power. I prefer that subtlety, but instead we get mass heals and resurrections. Not a big fan. I'm not really worried about Loyal. It seems like an unnecessary cliffhanger. Weird changes like cutting Moiraine off from the One Power seems unnecessary. And those kind of adaptations makes me nervous for the future. We'll see how it goes. But in general, I'm enjoying the adaptation. I'm certainly looking forward to it far more than Rings of Power, which I'm kind of dreading. But we'll have to see. A season or two later, I may change my mind substantially in either direction. But that's it for now. See you next time.
Love it.